The rain fell heavily on the streets of Copenhagen as Elena Martinez hurried through the narrow cobblestone paths. Her worn-out sneakers splashed through puddles, and her second-hand coat barely kept the cold October wind at bay. She clutched her violin case tighter, knowing she had only 15 minutes before her shift at the small cafe near the university would begin. Elena had never imagined her life would lead her to Denmark. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Barcelona, she had dreamed of becoming a professional violinist. But dreams cost money, and after her father's sudden illness drained their savings, she had taken the scholarship to study music in Copenhagen, working 3 jobs to send money home. That particular morning started like any other. She served coffee to sleepy students and tired professors, her mind wandering to the violin competition happening that weekend at the Royal Danish Academy. She had practiced for months, knowing the prize money could help her family back home. But she also knew the competition would be fierce, filled with students who had private tutors and expensive instruments. During her lunch break, Elena found her usual practice spot in the abandoned music room of the old university building. The acoustics were perfect. And more importantly, it was free. She pulled out her violin, a gift from her late grandmother, its wood worn smooth from decades of use. As she played, she poured her heart into every note, letting the music wash away her worries about unpaid bills and uncertain futures. Unknown to her, someone was listening from the hallway. Prince Alexander of Denmark had been visiting the university for a routine charity event. At 28, he was tired of the endless parade of suitable matches his mother presented to him. Each woman was perfectly polished, perfectly educated, and perfectly boring. He had slipped away from his security detail, seeking a moment of peace in the old building he remembered from his own university days. The music stopped him in his tracks. It wasn't just technically proficient. It was alive with emotion, telling a story without words. He found himself drawn to the partially open door, peering inside to see a young woman lost in her music. Her dark hair fell messily around her face. Her clothes were simple and practical, and there was a small hole in her left shoe. But the way she played made everything else fade away. When Elena finished, she opened her eyes to find a man standing in the doorway. He was tall, with sandy brown hair and kind blue eyes, dressed in an expensive but understated suit. She immediately felt self-conscious about her appearance. "I'm sorry," she said quickly in accented English. "I didn't know anyone else used this room. I'll leave." "Please, don't," Alexander said, stepping inside. "That was beautiful. Brahms, wasn't it?" Elena nodded, surprised. Most people couldn't identify classical pieces so easily. "The Violin Sonata?" "No. 3. It's my favorite." "Mine too." Alexander smiled. "Though I've never heard it played quite like that. You made it sound like homesickness and hope mixed together." Something in his understanding made Elena's guard drop slightly. "That's exactly what it feels like to me. Music is the only way I can express things I can't put into words." They talked for a few more minutes about music, and Alexander was struck by her passion and authenticity. She didn't try to impress him or act differently than herself. She had no idea who he was, and he found that refreshing. "I should go," Elena said eventually, glancing at her phone. "My break is over, and my boss will fire me if I'm late again." "Wait," Alexander said impulsively. "Will you be playing in the academy competition this weekend?" Elena's face clouded slightly. "Yes, though I don't expect much. The other competitors have advantages I don't." "Advantages aren't everything," Alexander said. "Sometimes heart matters more." She gave him a small smile that transformed her tired face. "That's a nice thought. Maybe I'll see you there if you're coming to watch." After she left, Alexander stood in the empty room, still hearing echoes of her music. His security team found him there 10 minutes later, and his secretary reminded him of his next appointment. But throughout the rest of his day, through boring meetings and formal dinners, he couldn't stop thinking about the girl with the violin and the hole in her shoe. Elena, meanwhile, rushed back to the cafe, her mind spinning. The stranger had been different from anyone she'd met in Copenhagen. Most people here were polite but distant, especially when they heard her accent or learned she was just a scholarship student working minimum wage jobs. But he had listened to her music like it mattered, like she mattered. That evening, as she practiced in her tiny shared apartment, her roommate Christine burst through the door. "Elena, you'll never believe what happened. Prince Alexander visited the university today. I saw him from my economics class. He's even more handsome in person than in photos." Elena's bow slipped on the strings. "Prince Alexander?" "Yes. Can you imagine? A real prince walking through our halls. Though apparently, he disappeared for a while, and his security was frantic. Typical royal rebel behavior, if you ask me." A cold realization washed over Elena. The man in the music room. His expensive suit. His cultured voice. The way he carried himself with unconscious authority. She thought about their conversation and felt foolish. Of course, a prince would know about classical music. Of course, he would have that easy confidence. And of course, he was just being polite to a nobody playing violin in an empty room. She tried to push the encounter from her mind over the next few days, focusing on preparing for the competition. But sometimes, while practicing the Brahms sonata, she remembered how he said she made it sound like homesickness and hope. No one had ever understood her music quite like that before. The morning of the competition arrived gray and drizzly. Elena, dressed in her only formal dress, a simple black piece she'd bought secondhand. She tried not to notice how the other competitors arrived in cars with drivers. Their violin cases probably worth more than everything she owned. The competition venue was the Grand Hall of the Royal Danish Academy. Its soaring ceilings and perfect acoustics both inspiring and intimidating. Elena found a quiet corner to warm up, running through scales to calm her nerves. She had drawn a late slot, which meant hours of waiting and listening to other performers. As the morning progressed, her confidence wavered. The other violinists were magnificent. Their techniques flawless, their instruments singing with rich, expensive tones. During the lunch break, she overheard two competitors discussing their summer plans. "I'm thinking of the master class in Vienna," one said. "Though Mother insists I should do the one in New York instead. Why not both?" The other laughed. "That's what I'm doing." Elena slipped outside, needing air. She found a quiet spot in the academy's garden and sat on a bench, fighting tears. What was she doing here? These people lived in a different world, one where they could casually discuss international master classes while she calculated whether she could afford lunch. Running away? She looked up to find Prince Alexander standing there. This time, with no pretense of anonymity. Two security guards stood at a discreet distance. He was dressed formally, and she realized with a sinking heart that he must be here in some official capacity. "Your Highness," she said stiffly, starting to stand. "Please, just sit," he said, taking a seat beside her despite her shock. "I saw you perform earlier. You were scheduled for the morning slot, weren't you?" "I haven't played yet," Elena admitted. "I'm in the afternoon group." "Then why do you look like you've already lost?" His directness surprised her into honesty. "Because I have. You should hear the others. They're perfect." "Perfect is overrated," Alexander said. "I've heard perfect all morning. Technical excellence without soul. It's like looking at a photograph of a sunset instead of watching the real thing." "Easy for you to say," Elena said, then caught herself. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't." "No, please. Be honest. It's refreshing." "Fine," Elena said, her frustration overcoming protocol. "It's easy for someone in your position to dismiss perfection. You've never had to be perfect just to be considered adequate. Those other competitors, they can afford to add soul to their technique because they've had the best teachers, the best instruments, the best everything. I'm playing a violin, held together by hope and old glue, wearing a dress that still smells like the thrift shop, trying to compete against people who've never wondered if they could afford next month's rent." She stopped, horrified at her outburst. But Alexander wasn't offended. Instead, he looked at her with something like admiration. "You're right," he said simply. "I don't understand that struggle. But I do understand music. And I heard yours the other day. You have something those perfect performers don't. What's that? Truth, he said. When you play, you're not trying to impress anyone. You're just being. That's rarer than perfect technique. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Alexander asked, "What would you do with the prize money?" "If you won? Send it home," Elena answered without hesitation. "My father needs medical treatment. We can't afford. My younger sister wants to go to university, but she's working in a factory instead to help support the family. I'd give them options they don't have now." "And for yourself?" Elena smiled sadly. "Having my family secure would be for myself. That's all I really want." A staff member appeared, calling for afternoon competitors to prepare. Elena stood, smoothing her dress. "I should go." "Elena," Alexander said, and she was surprised he remembered her name. "Play like you did in that empty room. Play for your father and sister. Play your truth. That's how you win." As she walked back inside, Elena felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't exactly confidence, but maybe it was courage. She thought about her family, about all the sacrifices that had brought her here. She thought about her grandmother, who had played violin in small cafes in Barcelona, never famous but always passionate. When her name was finally called, Elena walked onto the stage. The judges sat in an intimidating row, and the audience was filled with Copenhagen's classical music elite. For a moment, stage fright threatened to overwhelm her. Then she saw him. Prince Alexander sat in the royal box, apart from the main audience. When their eyes met, he gave her the slightest nod of encouragement. Elena lifted her grandmother's violin, closed her eyes, and began to play. She chose the Brahms sonata, the one Alexander had heard her practice. But this time, she didn't try to play it perfectly. She played it honestly. Every note carried the weight of her homesickness, her fear, her love for her family, her desperate hope for a better future. She played her truth, just as Alexander had suggested. When the last note faded, the hall was absolutely silent. Elena opened her eyes, certain she had failed spectacularly. Then the applause began, starting slowly but building to something thunderous. Even some of the judges were clapping, breaking their usual stoic demeanor. Elena bowed and hurried off stage, her heart pounding. In the wings, other competitors looked at her with new respect and perhaps a touch of worry. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. Elena changed back into her regular clothes and found a corner to wait for the results. She tried not to hope too much, but Alexander's words kept echoing in her mind. As evening approached, all the competitors gathered in the main hall for the announcement. The director of the academy took the stage, holding the envelope with the results. "This year's competition has been exceptional," he began. "The level of talent has made our decision very difficult." Elena barely listened to the honorary mentions and third-place announcement. When second place went to one of the violinists she'd overheard discussing Vienna, her heart sank. Of course, she'd been foolish to hope. "And first place," the director continued, "goes to someone who reminded us why we fell in love with music in the first place. Someone who played not just with technical skill, but with a rare emotional honesty. Elena Martinez." For a moment, Elena couldn't process the words. Then Christine, who had come to support her, was hugging her and pushing her toward the stage. In a daze, Elena accepted the trophy and the envelope containing the prize money. As the crowd dispersed for the reception, Elena stood clutching her prizes, still in shock. She needed to call her family, needed to tell them everything had changed. But first, she found herself looking around for one particular face. She found Alexander near the exit, preparing to leave with his entourage. Their eyes met across the room, and he smiled. A genuine, warm smile that made her temporarily forget he was a prince. Without thinking, Elena hurried over. Protocol probably demanded she wait to be approached. But she didn't care. "Thank you," she said simply when she reached him. "I did nothing," Alexander replied. "That was all you. You reminded me what mattered," Elena said. That's everything. They stood there for a moment, very aware of the watching crowd, and the security detail, and the impossibility of it all. Then, Alexander's secretary appeared, reminding him of his evening engagement. "Congratulations, Miss Martinez," Alexander said formally. Then, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Would you perhaps play for me again sometime? Somewhere with better acoustics than that old practice room?" Elena's heart skipped. "I'd like that." As she watched him leave, Elena felt like she was standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. She had come to Copenhagen for a music education and ended up finding so much more. Confidence in her own worth, the prize money that would help her family, and possibly, impossibly, the interest of a prince who saw her truth when she played. But that's the thing about fairy tales that happen in real life. They're never as simple as they seem. Elena would soon learn that winning a competition was easy compared to navigating the complexities of a royal world that had no place for a scholarship student from Barcelona. Still, in that moment, clutching her violin case and prize money, with the echo of applause in her ears and the memory of understanding in a prince's eyes, Elena felt like anything was possible. She had played her truth and won. Whatever came next, no one could take that away from her. The Copenhagen morning newspaper landed on cafe tables across the city with a soft thud. On page 3, a small article celebrated local academy competition winners. Elena's name appeared in modest print. But it was the photograph that caused whispers. In the corner of the image, barely visible but unmistakable to those who looked closely, stood Prince Alexander, watching the stage with an expression of unusual interest. Elena knew nothing of this as she served breakfast to early morning customers. The prize money had been wired home yesterday, and her father had called in tears. For the first time in months, she felt light, as if a weight she'd carried so long she'd forgotten its presence had finally lifted. "Elena, table 6 wants their usual," her manager called out. She grabbed the coffee pot and headed to the corner table, where an elderly professor sat reading his newspaper. He glanced up at her, then back at the paper, then at her again with growing recognition. "You're the violinist," he said with delight. "The one who won the academy competition. What on earth are you doing serving coffee?" Elena smiled politely. "Winning one competition doesn't pay all the bills, Professor. But surely now you'll have opportunities." "I hope so," Elena said gently, refilling his cup. "But hope doesn't pay rent." Later that morning, as she was cleaning tables, her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Probably another telemarketer. But something made her answer. "Miss Martinez? This is Henrik Larsson from the Royal Danish Orchestra. We heard your performance at the competition. Would you be available to audition for our second violin section? We have an unexpected opening." Elena nearly dropped the phone. The Royal Danish Orchestra was one of Europe's finest. An audition there was beyond her wildest dreams. "Yes," she managed. "Yes, absolutely. Excellent. This Thursday at 2 o'clock. We'll send the audition pieces to your email." After hanging up, Elena stood frozen in the middle of the cafe, dirty dishes still in her hands. Christine, who worked the same shift, noticed her expression. "What happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "The Royal Orchestra wants me to audition," Elena whispered. Christine squealed so loudly that customers turned to stare. "Elena! This is huge! You have to tell!" She stopped, her eyes widening. "Oh my God, do you think the prince had something to do with this?" "What? No," Elena said quickly. "Why would you think that?" Christine pulled out her phone, showing her the morning newspaper's digital edition. There was the photograph, and when Christine zoomed in, Alexander's face was clearly visible watching Elena perform. "Everyone's talking about it," Christine said excitedly. "The prince who never shows interest in anyone, captivated by an unknown violinist. It's like a movie." Elena felt her stomach drop. "It's not like that. He just appreciates music." But even as she said it, she remembered their conversation in the garden, the way he'd encouraged her, the soft question about playing for him again. She pushed the thoughts away. She couldn't afford fairy tale dreams. She had an audition to prepare for. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of practice. Elena played until her fingers were raw, going over the audition pieces hundreds of times. The required repertoire was challenging. A Mozart concerto, orchestral excerpts from Mahler and Strauss, and a piece of her own choosing. On Wednesday evening, exhausted from practicing, she decided to take a walk to clear her head. Copenhagen in late autumn was beautiful in a melancholy way, the early darkness broken by warm lights from shop windows. She found herself wandering toward the harbor, where she often went to think. She was surprised to find someone else at her usual spot, a figure in a plain coat and cap, looking out at the water. It wasn't until he turned that she recognized Alexander. "Your Highness," she said, startled. His security detail, she noticed, stood at a considerable distance. "Please, just Alexander," he said. "At least when we're alone. Though I suppose we're never really alone." He gestured wryly toward his guards. "What are you doing here?" Elena asked, then caught herself. "Sorry, I suppose princes can walk wherever they want." He smiled at that. "Actually, they can't. That's why I treasure moments like this. I used to come here as a university student, when life was simpler." He paused. "I heard about your audition tomorrow." Elena stiffened. "Did you arrange it?" "No," Alexander said firmly. "Henrik Larsson is far too principled to hire anyone based on royal recommendation. He called me after they decided to invite you, worried that any connection to me might overshadow your talent. I told him he was overthinking it." "Was he?" Elena asked quietly. "There was a photo in the newspaper. People are talking." Alexander sighed. "People always talk. It's background noise in my life. I'm sorry if it's complicated things for you." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the harbor lights reflect on the dark water. Finally, Elena spoke. "Why did you really come to the competition?" "My mother insisted I present the awards," Alexander admitted. "Royal duty, showing support for the arts. That sort of thing. I was planning to slip in for the ceremony only. Then I heard you practicing and... Well, and what?" He turned to look at her directly. "And I remembered why music matters. Not as a cultural obligation or a box to tick on royal engagements, but as something real and vital and human." He paused. "You reminded me of that." Elena felt something dangerous flutter in her chest. This was exactly what she couldn't afford to feel. "I should go. I need to rest for tomorrow." "Elena," Alexander said as she turned to leave, "play at the audition like you're alone in that practice room. Don't think about the orchestra or the job or anything else. Just play." She nodded and walked away quickly, not trusting herself to say more. Behind her, Alexander watched her go, knowing he was walking a careful line between interest and interference. Between his personal desires and his public position, the audition day dawned bright and cold. Elena arrived at the concert hall an hour early, her best black dress pressed and her grandmother's violin carefully tuned. Other auditioners filled the waiting room, accomplished musicians from across Europe, all vying for one position. When her turn came, Elena walked onto the stage to face the audition panel. Henrik Larsson sat in the center, his expression neutral, but not unkind. She lifted her violin and began with Mozart, letting the familiar notes calm her nerves. The Mahler excerpts came next, technically demanding passages that tested every skill she'd developed. For her final piece, she had chosen the Brahms sonata, the one that had started everything. As she played, she thought not of the panel or the job, but of her grandmother teaching her the violin in their small Barcelona apartment, of her father's face when she'd told him about the prize money, of her sister's voice on the phone, saying she'd enrolled for university classes. And yes, she thought of Alexander too, of understanding in blue eyes and words about truth being rarer than perfection. When she finished, Henrik Larsson made a note on his paper. "Thank you, Miss Martinez. We'll be in touch." Elena left the building feeling drained but oddly peaceful. She had played her best. Whatever happened now was out of her hands. The call came 2 days later, just as she was starting her evening shift at the cafe. "Congratulations, Miss Martinez." Henrik Larsson's voice was warm. We'd like to offer you the position. Rehearsals begin next Monday. Elena sat down hard on the nearest chair, customers and coffee forgotten. Thank you. Thank you so much. You earned it, Henrik said. Though I should warn you, orchestra life isn't easy. Long hours, demanding repertoire, and the pay, while better than cafe work, won't make you rich. It's not about being rich, Elena said. It's about playing music that matters. Good answer. Welcome to the Royal Danish Orchestra. After the call, Elena stood in the cafe storage room and cried, tears of relief, joy, and a little fear. Everything was changing so fast. A month ago, she was just another struggling student. Now she was an orchestra musician, with a future that suddenly seemed full of possibility. Her manager was less thrilled. 2 weeks' notice at least, he grumbled when she told him. Though I suppose I should have seen this coming. You were always too good for coffee service. That weekend, Elena moved her few possessions from her shared apartment to a tiny studio closer to the concert hall. It was barely larger than a closet, but it was hers alone. She spent Saturday arranging her meager furniture and Sunday practicing with the orchestra parts Henrik had sent. On Sunday evening, as she was heating soup on her single-burner stove, her phone rang. The number was unlisted. Hello? Elena, it's Alexander. I hope I'm not interrupting. Her heart did that dangerous flutter again. No, just having dinner. How did you get my number? I have resourceful staff, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. I wanted to congratulate you on the orchestra position. You must be pleased. Terrified is more accurate, Elena admitted. But yes, pleased too. I wondered, Alexander said carefully, if you might have dinner with me this week. Somewhere discreet. Just to talk. I find I miss our conversations about music. Elena closed her eyes. Every rational part of her knew this was a bad idea. He was a prince. She was nobody. The media attention from one photograph had been uncomfortable enough. What would happen if people saw them having dinner? But another part of her, the part that had taken a scholarship to a foreign country and entered a competition she couldn't win, whispered that some risks were worth taking. Just dinner? She asked. Just dinner. Though I should warn you, my security detail will be nearby, and discretion in my world is relative. If you're seen with me, people will talk more. Elena thought about it. She'd spent her whole life being careful, being practical, thinking of others before herself. Maybe it was time to do something just because she wanted to. Okay, she said. Dinner. They arranged to meet Wednesday evening at a small restaurant Alexander knew. One accustomed to discreet high-profile guests. Elena spent far too long choosing what to wear, finally settling on the same black dress she'd worn to the audition. It was the nicest thing she owned. The restaurant was tucked away on a quiet street, elegant, but not ostentatious. Alexander was already there when she arrived, rising as the waiter showed her to their private corner table. You came, he said, seeming genuinely pleased. I almost didn't, Elena admitted, sitting down. This feels like stepping into a story that can't end well. Most good stories involve risk, Alexander pointed out. Safe stories are boring. Safe stories are boring. Easy for a prince to say. Your risks come with safety nets. Do they? Alexander's expression grew serious. Every choice I make is scrutinized. Every person I speak to is investigated. Every relationship is analyzed for political implications. You think that's a safety net? Elena studied him, seeing for perhaps the first time the weight he carried. I'm sorry. I didn't think of it that way. Most people don't, he said. They see the palace and the title and assume the rest is easy. But can we make a deal? Tonight, you're not a struggling student, and I'm not a prince. We're just two people who appreciate Brahms having dinner. Deal, Elena smiled. The evening passed more easily than Elena had expected. They talked about music, of course, but also about their lives. Alexander told her about studying political science when he'd wanted to study literature, about the constant pressure to be perfect, about the loneliness of a life lived in public view. Elena shared stories of Barcelona, of her grandmother's small concerts in local cafes, of the weight of family expectations of a different kind. She told him about the guilt she felt for leaving home, even though everyone insisted she go. "We're both caught between duty and desire," Alexander observed over dessert. "You to your family, me to mine. But your duty comes with palaces," Elena pointed out. "And yours comes with love," Alexander countered. "I'm not sure which weighs more." When dinner ended, Alexander insisted on driving her home, despite her protests about his security detail already being inconvenienced enough. "They're paid very well to be inconvenienced," he said, helping her into the car. Outside her building, Elena turned to say goodbye and found Alexander looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I should warn you," he said quietly. "I'm not good at casual. When I'm interested in something, or someone, I tend to be all in. It's a character flaw. My mother frequently points out." "Alexander," Elena began, not sure how to finish. "I know," he said. "I know all the reasons this is complicated. But I'd like to see you again, if you're willing. No pressure, no expectations. Just possibility." Elena thought about all the sensible reasons to say no. Then she thought about how alive she'd felt talking to him, how he understood parts of her that no one else seemed to see. "Possibility," she repeated. "I think I can handle possibility." He smiled then, brilliant and genuine. "Good. Now go inside before my security chief has an aneurysm about protocol." Elena laughed and got out of the car. At her building entrance, she turned back to wave and saw him watching her through the window. The whole thing felt surreal. A prince dropping her off at her rundown building like a regular date. Inside her tiny apartment, Elena sat on her narrow bed and tried to process the evening. She knew she was walking into something complicated, potentially painful. The rational thing would be to stop now, to focus on her new job and forget about impossible princes. But she thought about Alexander's words about safe stories being boring. Maybe he was right. Maybe some risks were worth taking, even if you couldn't see how the story would end. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Thank you for tonight. Looking forward to possibility." Elena smiled despite herself. Whatever happened next, she had a feeling her life would never be boring again. The next morning brought reality crashing back. A gossip blog had somehow gotten wind of their dinner, though thankfully no photos. The headline read, "Mystery Woman Dines with Denmark's Most Eligible Royal." At orchestra rehearsal, a few musicians gave her curious looks. But Henrik Larsson treated her exactly as he did everyone else, with professional distance and exacting standards. Elena threw herself into the music, grateful for the distraction. During a break, the principal's second violin, an older woman named Margrethe, approached her. "Word of advice," she said kindly. "Music first, everything else second. Orchestra politics are complicated enough without adding royal drama." "There's no drama," Elena said quickly. Margrethe smiled. "Not yet. But I've been around long enough to recognize the signs. Just be careful. This world can be cruel to outsiders." That evening, Elena's phone rang constantly. Reporters had somehow gotten her number. She turned it off and focused on practicing, but anxiety gnawed at her. This was exactly what she'd been afraid of. A knock at her door made her jump. Through the peephole, she saw a well-dressed woman holding an envelope. "Miss Martinez, I'm from the Palace Communications Office. Prince Alexander asked me to deliver this personally." Elena opened the door cautiously and took the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "I'm sorry about the media attention. I've asked our press office to handle it. Your privacy will be protected. Please don't let this scare you away from possibility. P.S. There's a car downstairs if you'd like to go somewhere quiet to practice. No obligations." Elena looked out her window and saw a discreet black car waiting. She hesitated, then grabbed her violin. She was tired of letting fear make her decisions. The driver took her to a private entrance of the palace Elena didn't even know existed. A staff member led her through quiet corridors to a music room that took her breath away. Perfect acoustics, a gorgeous piano, and windows overlooking the palace gardens. His Highness thought you might appreciate a peaceful place to practice, the staff member said. You're welcome to use this room whenever you need. The prince will join you when his evening appointments are finished, if that's acceptable. Elena nodded, still stunned. As the staff member left, she stood in the center of the beautiful room, violin in hand, and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She began to play, letting the perfect acoustics wash over her. For an hour, she forgot about media attention and impossible situations, lost in the pure joy of music. In a space designed for it, she was deep in a Paganini caprice when she sensed someone listening. Alexander stood in the doorway, formal in his dinner jacket from whatever royal function he'd attended. "Don't stop," he said when she lowered her violin. "Please." So she continued, playing pieces she loved while he sat in a chair by the window, eyes closed, listening. When she finally stopped, he opened his eyes and smiled. "Better than the old practice room?" "Slightly," she said dryly. "Thank you for this. And for dealing with the media." "I'm sorry you need dealing with at all," Alexander said, loosening his bow tie. "This is the part I hate, how my life spills onto everyone near me." "I knew what I was getting into," Elena said, though she wasn't sure that was true. "Did you?" Alexander stood and walked closer. "Because I'm not sure I did. I thought I could keep things simple, casual, but sitting through dinner tonight, all I could think about was hearing you play again." They were standing close now, closer than appropriate for a prince and a commoner who'd had one dinner. Elena knew she should step back, make an excuse to leave. Instead, she stayed where she was, heart pounding. "This is complicated," she said softly. "Everything in my life is complicated," Alexander replied. "But this, talking to you, hearing your music, this feels simple. It feels right." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and touched her cheek. Elena's breath caught. She'd been touched by men before, but never with such careful intention, such awareness of the moment's weight. "We should be careful," she whispered. "Probably," he agreed, but didn't move away. Later, Elena would wonder who moved first. All she knew was that suddenly, they were kissing, her violin forgotten in her hand, his arms around her in that perfect music room. It was a kiss that tasted like possibility and danger, like everything she'd been careful to avoid and everything she secretly wanted. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing unsteadily, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. "I'm going to fall in love with you," he said quietly, like a confession. "I can feel it already." Alexander," Elena's voice shook. "Your world. Your family. They'll never accept this." "Maybe not," he admitted. "But I've spent my whole life doing what's expected. Just once, I want to choose something for myself. And if it ends badly, then at least it will have been real," he said. "That's more than most princes get." Elena pulled back to look at him. This man who could have anyone but was choosing her. She thought about safe choices and boring stories, about duty and desire, about the weight of expectations and the lightness of unexpected joy. "Okay," she said finally. "But we go slow. I have a new job to focus on. And you have a country to help run. We don't let this consume everything else." "Agreed," Alexander said, though his smile suggested he knew how difficult that would be. As the palace car drove Elena home later that night, she touched her lips, still feeling the echo of that kiss. She'd crossed a line there was no coming back from. Whatever happened now, her life had taken a turn toward the extraordinary. Back in her apartment, she picked up her phone to find dozens of messages. Most were from reporters, but one was from her sister in Barcelona. "Elena, there's a photo of you online getting into a palace car. What's going on? Are you dating the prince? Call me immediately." Elena smiled, despite the complications ahead. She typed back, "It's a long story. But yes, something is happening. I'll call tomorrow." As she got ready for bed in her tiny apartment, Elena thought about the contrast between this morning, when she was just a new orchestra member trying to avoid media attention, and tonight, when she'd kissed a prince in a palace music room. Life, she was learning, had a way of ignoring your careful plans. Sometimes that was terrifying. But sometimes, like tonight, it was magic. The real test would be what came next. When the palace realized the prince was serious about a Spanish violinist, with nothing to her name but talent and determination. When the media turned their full attention on her background. When she had to balance falling in love with staying true to herself. But those were worries for tomorrow. Tonight, Elena Martinez, cafe worker, turned orchestra musician turned woman, who'd kissed a prince, fell asleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of possibility. The morning Elena's world exploded started like any other. She woke early for orchestra rehearsal, made coffee in her tiny kitchen, and checked her phone for messages from Alexander. They'd been seeing each other secretly for 3 months now, stealing moments between his royal duties and her rehearsal schedule. She should have known something was wrong when her phone had no new messages. Alexander always sent a good morning text, usually at an absurdly early hour between his morning run and first meeting. But she was running late and didn't think much of it until she stepped outside her building. Flashbulbs exploded in her face. Microphones thrust toward her. Voices shouted questions in Danish and English. "Elena, how long have you been seeing the prince? Did you know he was engaged to someone else? Are you pregnant with the royal baby?" Elena stumbled backward, overwhelmed. 2 men in suits appeared from nowhere, palace security, she realized, and formed a barrier between her and the mob. "Miss Martinez, please come with us," one said quietly. "Prince Alexander sent us to bring you to safety." Shell-shocked, Elena let them guide her to a waiting car. As they drove away from the chaos, she finally looked at her phone properly. Hundreds of notifications. Missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. And then she saw the headlines. Prince's secret Spanish lover exposed. Palace scandal. Alexander's inappropriate relationship, from cafe to castle. The gold digger who caught a prince. Her hands shook as she scrolled through article after article. Photos she didn't even know existed. Alexander helping her from a car. The two of them walking in a private garden. Even a grainy image through a restaurant window of them holding hands. But it was the revelations about her background that made her sick. They'd found everything. Her father's illness and debts. Her jobs cleaning offices before the cafe. They'd even tracked down her ex-boyfriend in Barcelona, who'd apparently been paid to describe her as ambitious and always dreaming above her station. The car pulled up to a palace side entrance. Elena was ushered inside, past stern-faced staff who avoided eye contact, to a sitting room where Alexander paced like a caged animal. When he saw her, his face crumbled with relief and anguish. "Elena, I'm so sorry. I don't know how they found out. We were so careful." "Engaged?" Elena interrupted, her voice hollow. "The reporters asked if I knew you were engaged." Alexander's face went white. "That's not... Elena, please, let me explain." "Explain what?" Elena felt tears threatening. "That you have a fiancé? That I've been, what, your last fling before settling down with someone appropriate?" "No." Alexander grabbed her hands. "There's no engagement. But my mother. She's been in negotiations with the Belgian royal family. Princess Isabel and I have known each other since childhood. Everyone assumed, expected." He trailed off, seeing Elena's expression. "So there is someone else," Elena said flatly. "Someone suitable. Someone who won't embarrass your family by having the wrong background. And the wrong accent. And the wrong everything." "I don't care about any of that," Alexander insisted. "I care about you. Your mother clearly disagrees." Elena pulled her hands free. "God, I've been so stupid. Did you think I wouldn't find out? That we could just keep playing this secret game until you had to do your duty and marry someone with the right bloodline? I was going to tell my mother about us this week," Alexander said desperately. "I was going to make it official. Public. Elena, I love you. Elena. 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 I love you." Before she could respond, the door opened. Queen Margrethe entered. every inch the monarch, despite her advancing years. Elena had seen her in photos, but in person, the Queen's presence was overwhelming. She surveyed Elena with cool blue eyes that gave away nothing. "So," the Queen said in accented English, "you're the girl causing such commotion?" Elena lifted her chin, refusing to be cowed. "Your Majesty." "Mother." Alexander stepped forward. "This isn't Elena's fault." "Quiet, Alexander." The Queen's tone brooked no argument. "Miss Martinez and I need to speak. Alone." Alexander looked between them, clearly torn. Finally, he squeezed Elena's shoulder and left. The Queen gestured for Elena to sit, then took a chair across from her. "Tea will be brought," the Queen said, as if they were having a social visit, "though I suspect neither of us has much appetite." They sat in silence until a servant delivered an ornate tea service. The Queen poured with steady hands, the delicate china clinking in the tense quiet. "Tell me," the Queen said finally, "what are your intentions toward my son?" Elena almost laughed at the formal phrasing. "I don't have intentions. I fell in love. I didn't plan it or want it or seek it out. It just happened." "Love," the Queen repeated, as if tasting the word. "A luxury princes can rarely afford. Alexander knows this. He was raised to understand duty comes first." "Then he should have stayed away from me," Elena said, surprising herself with her boldness. "I didn't chase him. I didn't even know who he was when we first met. I was just playing violin in an empty room." Something flickered in the Queen's eyes. Surprise. Perhaps. Or respect. "Yes. I heard about that. Alexander played me a recording from the competition." "You're quite talented." "Thank you," Elena said stiffly. "Talent alone, however, doesn't prepare someone for royal life," the Queen continued. "The scrutiny, the protocol, the constant sacrifice of personal desires for public duty. It's a hard life, Miss Martinez. Not a fairy tale." "I never expected a fairy tale," Elena said. "I expected to work hard, play music, and maybe find some happiness along the way." Alexander complicated that. "Yes, but I won't apologize for loving him." The Queen studied her for a long moment. "You're stronger than you look. But strength isn't enough. Let me be clear. If Alexander chooses you, really chooses you, it will cost him. Princess Isabel represents an alliance Denmark needs. Her family has already expressed outrage at these headlines. There will be diplomatic consequences. So I should disappear," Elena said bitterly. "Make it easy for everyone. Let Alexander marry his princess and produce appropriate heirs while I go back to serving coffee. That would be the sensible course." The Queen agreed. "I could arrange compensation. Enough to pay for your father's treatment, your sister's education, your own future. You'd never struggle again." Elena's breath caught. It was everything she'd worked for. Everything her family needed, offered on a silver platter. All she had to do was walk away from Alexander. "And if I say no?" The Queen's expression hardened slightly. "Then you face the media storm. Every aspect of your life dissected. Your family in Spain hounded. Your position in the orchestra potentially compromised. Donors don't like scandal. And even if you weather all that, you must ask yourself, do you want Alexander to lose his birthright for you? Because make no mistake, there are those who would use this relationship to question his judgment, his fitness to serve." Elena felt tears spill over. Everything the Queen said was true. How could she ask Alexander to give up so much? How could their love be worth a kingdom? "I need to think," she whispered. "Of course." The Queen rose. "You may stay here today. The media can't reach you in the palace. But decide quickly, Miss Martinez. Every hour this continues, the damage compounds." After the Queen left, Elena sat alone in the ornate room, feeling smaller than ever. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from her family, her friends, the orchestra. She turned it off, unable to face anyone yet. Alexander found her there an hour later, curled in the chair, staring at nothing. What did she say? He asked gently, kneeling beside her. The truth, Elena said dully. That I'm going to cost you everything. You're worth everything, Alexander said immediately. Am I? Elena looked at him through tears. Worth your crown? Worth disappointing your entire country? Worth breaking treaties and alliances? Your mother offered me money to leave, enough to fix everything back home. Alexander's face darkened. Of course she did. And I'm considering it, Elena admitted. How can I not? My family needs help. You need to be king someday. Maybe loving each other isn't enough reason to destroy so many lives. Elena, no. Alexander pulled her into his arms. Don't let them convince you our love is destructive. It's the best thing in my life. But at what cost? Elena pulled back to see his face. Tell me honestly. If you choose me, what happens? Alexander was quiet for a moment.